My younger son, Theodore, is nearly 13 weeks old on Tuesday. And so this past week, I was reflecting on how much he has changed since he was first born. And so I was reflecting back on those first 3 weeks that was a blur in his life and my life. And I was thinking about how I watched a lot of TV. So that's my self-disclosure for you this morning. I know you're not supposed to watch much screen time for the kiddos until 2 years old, so please no judgment. But it was a blur, and we watched a lot of the TLC network, if I'm honest. And so one of the shows that we found ourselves watching quite a lot was Four Weddings. I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but in case you're not, the premise of this show is that there are four brides, and they attend each other's weddings. And they're all competing to win this extravagant honeymoon. So when they go to the other bride's weddings, they rank the weddings. They assign points based on how much they liked the other woman's dress, how much they liked the ceremony, how much they liked the food and the reception as a whole. And the winner, who gets the most points, wins this honeymoon. Well, as you can imagine, it gets quite ridiculous sometimes, and yet I found it really entertaining, at least in those first few sleep-deprived weeks. Really enjoyed it. And as I was thinking about this upcoming weekend where we're talking about the wedding at Cana, I couldn't help but wonder, what would it have been like for that bride in Cana to be on this show? Needless to say, she would have had some really interesting scores come back. And with that being said, Let's look at the text for this morning. It comes from the Gospel of John, the 2nd chapter, verses 1 through 11. On the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine gave out, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what concern is that to you and to me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Now standing there were 6 stone water jars for the Jewish rites of purification, each holding 20 or 30 gallons. Jesus said to them, "Fill the jars with water," and they filled them up to the brim. He said to them, "Now draw some out and take it to the chief steward." So they took it. When the steward tasted the water that had become wine and did not know where it came from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew, the steward called the bridegroom and said to him, "Everyone serves the good wine first, and then the inferior wine after the guests have become drunk. But you have kept the good wine until now." Jesus did this, the first of his signs, in Cana of Galilee, and revealed his glory, and his disciples believed in him. The Gospel of the Lord. Well, you might well have noticed that the bride actually doesn't get mentioned in this particular story, and the groom himself only gets mentioned a tiny little bit. But that's beside the point. When the wine runs out, it's an absolute disaster. And now when we today may think of the wine running out, yeah, it's a problem, but it's not like it was back in this first century. For the wine to run out would have been an absolute disaster. Many commentators say that Jewish weddings in the first century probably lasted at least 7 days. And this was the third day. There was a lot more celebrating that needed to happen, and there was not the wine for it. And so while it sounds like, okay, that's a problem, it wasn't just a reflection of poor planning, but it showed a horrendous lack of hospitality. And in addition to not seeming like they'd planned enough, it also was a reflection that this couple didn't have status, they didn't have support. Because it was traditional for family and friends to send in advance food and wine for that week-long celebration. And since they didn't have that, they might as well have said, "We have no status in our community whatsoever." So this was a really, really bad thing. This was a disaster. And if the bride in Cana had been on 4 weddings, the other brides likely would have just thought, "Oh my goodness, what a faux pas." However, they could have ticked her off the running for winning that extravagant honeymoon, making their chances better. So last week we talked about Jesus' baptism, and being that we're focusing on epiphanies, we talked about how that story has Jesus revealing who he is, revealing that he is the Son of God. We talked about how God reveals part of God's character in that, and that is that God cannot be separated from whom he loves. We talked about God opening the heavens to speak to Jesus that he is his beloved child. And it was revealed to us that God calls us his beloved children in the waters of our baptism. So we might say, be that we're talking about revelations, what is in this story that is revealed to us? What does Jesus reveal about himself in this story? What does God reveal about God's self? And what might be revealed about us in this story where Jesus turns water into wine? In the Gospel of John, this is the very first of Jesus' signs. This is the very first sign where Jesus does a miracle, although it's referred to as a sign. And signs are never important in of themselves. It's always about what it points to. It's about what the sign directs our attention to. And so as amazing as turning water into wine is, and as cool and as useful as that could be at times, it's not about turning the water into wine. It's about more than that. And Mary, for her part, she clearly knows something about Jesus. She knows that he can do something to save this couple, save this family from their shame. And I can't help but wonder, was she thinking back to when the angel first appeared to her and revealed to her that she would bear the Son of the Most High? She would bear the Son of God. Was she remembering cradling her infant son? Would she sing lullabies to him, wonder what would that look like? And did she know this could be the time? Yet, Jesus says, my hour has not yet come. As much as he loves his mother, God is the one who decides when the time has come. And so, when Jesus tells the servants what to do, the servants do indeed obediently listen. They do indeed follow Jesus' instructions. And I can't help but wonder, what did these servants feel like? Could they see what they'd drawn out of those massive jars? Could they see that indeed the color had changed? Did they wonder what it tasted like? Were they nervous as they took it up to the chief steward, wondering, gosh, I hope this tastes good? Was their position on the line? Were they risking ridicule if in fact this wine tasted horrendous? We don't really know. All we know is that they do obey. And it's interesting, I think, that we find out that when this wine tastes better than anyone could have ever imagined or expected, the people in power, that chief steward and the groom himself, they don't know where it came from, yet they get to enjoy that sweetness. It's the servants who know. Those people who perhaps have the least power, the least prestige there, they know where it's come from. They recognize that Jesus is the source of that sweet abundance that came unexpectedly out of nowhere. I think it's also interesting to notice that Jesus enlists the hands of the servants to help reveal this truth about him. Jesus picks those who we might least expect. And so the servants in this story, for me, they also reveal a way that God seems to like to work. When we look back at stories in the Old Testament and then continuing through the New Testament, we have God choosing to work in unexpected ways through perhaps unexpected people. We see that God seems to like to choose those who think they're too old, like Abraham and Sarah. God seems to like to choose those who think they're too young, too inexperienced, like the prophet Jeremiah. And perhaps most familiarly, we have God choosing to come into our world as a helpless baby. We have God choosing to reveal God's self to the world as Jesus in the form of a tiny little baby born to a woman who's yet unmarried, who has no status, and is born in a very undignified way. And that baby is a king. And that king doesn't act, doesn't look, doesn't seem to be the king that people are expecting or wanting. And so today I think we can ask, who might be those people who are the least powerful among us, those most marginalized, those who we might least expect for God to use? Think about who those people might be that God might be revealing something of God's self to us. And take a moment this morning, and I'd like to invite you to think about a time or an experience when perhaps God surprised you, when God revealed something about his goodness, his grace for you and for the whole world in an unexpected way. And as you're thinking about that time, perhaps just thank God in your heart for that experience. And if there is nothing that's coming to mind right now, that's okay. But maybe consider asking God to reveal some of his grace and goodness to you in the coming weeks, in the coming years, in an unexpected way. I think this story also makes us ask another question, and that is, does the wine ever run out? Does the wine ever run out in your life? Has there been a time where disease, a job loss, a broken relationship, a friendship lost has just taken you by complete surprise out of nowhere? Because for all of us, at some point the answer will be yes. The wine does run out for us sometimes. And yet I think this story has a crucial message for us today. And that is that Jesus cares about us in those times. We may not feel God's presence with us in those times of brokenness, and yet God promises that he's there. In those earthly human matters, God is there with us. God does care. And the story shows that there is a promise for us, that God's sweet, abundant goodness, sweet, abundant grace is there. And there is a promise that he will save the very best, the very sweetest for last. Amen.